The church doors exploded inward as the mountain devil himself walked into Red Hollow's marriage auction. 10 years of exile carved into his scarred face, rifle on his back, murder in his reputation. Every head turned, every breath stopped. Because Gideon Hail hadn't spoken to another human soul in a decade, and now he was staring straight at the terrified woman on the auction block like she was the only person left alive. "This one's mine," he growled, and the entire town knew blood was about to spill. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The spring morning came cold and mean to Blackstone Ridge, the kind of cold that got into your bones and reminded you that the wilderness didn't give a damn whether you lived or died. Gideon Hail sat on the rotting porch of his cabin. If you could call 4 walls and a roof held together by spite and stubbornness a cabin, and watched the sun bleed orange across the jagged peaks. His coffee tasted like dirt. It always did. He'd stopped caring about things like flavor around year 3 of his exile. 10 years. 10 goddamn years since he'd killed a man in this territory. 10 years since Red Hollow had branded him a murderer and driven him into these mountains like a rabid dog. He didn't blame them. Not really. When you put a bullet through someone's chest in front of half the town, people tend to remember. Didn't matter that it was self-defense. Didn't matter that the Voss family had been trying to steal his land, burn his home, and put him 6 feet under for refusing to sell. All that mattered was the blood on his hands and the look in his eyes when he'd pulled that trigger. Cold, empty, like killing came natural to him. Maybe it did. Gideon stood, his joints popping loud enough to scare a crow off the nearest pine. He was 34 years old and felt twice that. The mountain had aged him in ways the calendar never could. His face was a roadmap of scars, one thick line across his left cheekbone from a wolf that got too close, another along his jaw from when he'd slipped on ice and cracked his face against granite. His beard was wild and unkempt, streaked with early gray. His hands were calloused leather, knuckles scarred from splitting firewood and fighting off animals that thought he looked like easy prey. He looked like exactly what the town believed him to be, a monster. But monsters needed supplies, same as anyone else. His flour sack was empty. His coffee was down to grounds and sadness. His rifle needed ammunition, and winter had been brutal enough that he'd burned through most of his stockpile just trying not to freeze to death, which meant one thing. He had to go down to Red Hollow and face the people who'd spent a decade telling their children ghost stories about the killer who lived in the mountains. He saddled his horse, a mean-tempered black stallion named Judas, who bit him twice before settling down, and started the long ride down the ridge. The trail was treacherous, all loose shale and narrow switchbacks with drops that could kill you 6 different ways. Gideon didn't mind. After 10 years alone, death didn't scare him much anymore. What scared him was people. By the time he reached the outskirts of Red Hollow, the sun was high and hot, and sweat was running down his back under his worn leather coat. The town hadn't changed much. Same dusty main street, same weathered buildings that looked one strong wind away from collapse. Same saloon where men drank away their failures. Same general store where Mrs. Patterson sold overpriced goods and watered-down whiskey. But something was different today. The street was too quiet, too empty. Every window had curtains drawn. Every door was shut tight. And down at the far end of town, outside the white-painted church with its crooked steeple, stood a crowd of people pressed together like cattle in a pen. Gideon's jaw tightened. He'd planned to get his supplies, keep his head down, and disappear back into the mountains before anyone could spit at him or pull a gun. But curiosity, that dangerous, persistent bastard, got the better of him. He steered Judas toward the church, the horse's hooves loud on the packed dirt. People turned as he approached. Their faces went white. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman grabbed her child and pulled the boy behind her skirts. An old man crossed himself and backed away. Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ, it's Hail." Gideon ignored them all. He'd stopped caring about their fear years ago. Let them think he was the devil incarnate. Let them tell stories about how he ate raw meat and talked to ghosts. None of it changed the fact that he was still breathing, and they were still here, and that was arrangement enough. He dismounted, tied Judas to a post, and pushed through the crowd toward the church doors. "You got no business here, Hail," a voice called out. Gideon recognized the speaker, Deputy Marshal Frank Cordell, a weasel-faced man with a badge he didn't deserve and a gun he barely knew how to use. Cordell had been one of the loudest voices calling for Gideon's hanging 10 years ago. "Just passing through," Gideon said, his voice rough from disuse. Talking hurt after months of silence. "Then keep passing. This is private business." "What kind of business needs half the town standing outside a church on a Tuesday?" Cordell's face twitched. "None of yours." But someone else answered, a younger man with guilt written all over his face. "It's an auction, Hale. Leave it be." Gideon's blood went cold. "What kind of auction?" No one answered. He didn't wait for permission. He shoved past Cordell, ignored the shouts behind him, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The inside of the church hit him like a fist to the gut. Rows of pews filled with men, wealthy men, judging by their pressed suits and polished boots. At the front, standing on the altar like it was a stage, stood Reverend Thomas Whitmore, a thin man with a voice like oil and eyes like a snake. And beside him, lined up like livestock at a county fair, stood 6 women, young women, daughters, wives, widows, all of them pale, all of them silent, all of them with the kind of fear in their eyes that made Gideon's hands curl into fists. "What the hell is this?" he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Every head turned. The Reverend's smile faltered. "Mr. Hale," Whitmore said carefully, like he was addressing a loaded gun, "this is a private ceremony. I must ask you to leave." "Answer the question." One of the men in the front pew stood, a fat, silver-haired bastard in an expensive coat. Gideon recognized him, Silas Blackwell, the town banker, the man who'd bought half of Red Hollow through loans and foreclosures, who smiled while he ruined families and called it business. "This is a marriage auction, Hale," Blackwell said smoothly. "Perfectly legal. These women have volunteered to marry respectable men of means in exchange for financial security. It's a transaction. Nothing more." "Volunteered," Gideon repeated, his voice flat. "That's right." Gideon's gaze moved to the women on the altar. Most of them stared at the floor. One was crying silently. Another looked like she might faint. But one, the woman at the far end, met his eyes. She was tall and slender, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her dress was simple, worn at the edges, but she wore it like armor. Her face was sharp and proud, with high cheekbones and a mouth set in a hard line. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. Green eyes, bright and fierce and absolutely terrified. She was trying so hard not to show it, trying so hard to stand tall while her world collapsed around her. Something in Gideon's chest cracked open. "And what happens if they refuse?" he asked, still looking at her. Blackwell chuckled. "Then their debts are called in. Their families lose their homes. Their fathers go to prison for unpaid loans. You see, Mr. Hale, these women are choosing the best of bad options. It's quite merciful, really." "Merciful," Gideon said quietly. The woman's eyes never left his. He turned to Blackwell. "Which one's yours?" The banker's smile widened. "The lovely Miss Evelyn Mercer." He gestured to the green-eyed woman. "Her father, rest his soul, left behind considerable debts before his unfortunate accident last winter. I'm offering to forgive those debts in exchange for her hand in marriage. It's a generous arrangement." "Her father's dead?" "Tragic fall from his horse, broke his neck." Blackwell's tone suggested he cared as much about that death as he did about the weather. Gideon looked back at Evelyn, saw the hatred flash across her face before she buried it. And he knew without a doubt that her father's death was no accident, knew that Blackwell had something to do with it, knew that this woman was being sold to her father's killer. 10 years ago, Gideon Hail had walked away from civilization because violence followed him like a shadow. He'd exiled himself to the mountains to keep his hands clean, to stop the bloodshed, to become something other than the killer everyone believed him to be. But standing in that church, watching a proud woman try not to break while a monster bought her like property, Gideon felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. Rage. Pure, cold, righteous rage. "How much?" he asked. The room went silent. Blackwell blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "How much for her debts?" "Mr. Hale, this is hardly—" "How much?" Blackwell's face hardened. $2,000. It was an obscene amount, more than most men earned in 5 years. Gideon didn't have $2,000. He didn't have $200. He had a cabin, a horse, a rifle, and nothing else worth selling. He looked at Evelyn again, saw her watching him with something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. and he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I'll marry her," Gideon said. The church erupted, men shouted, women gasped. Blackwell's face went purple with fury. "Absolutely not," the banker roared. "You have no right." "Same right as you," Gideon interrupted. "You said it yourself. This is an auction, so I'm making a bid. You don't have $2,000. "Don't need it." Gideon walked down the aisle toward the altar, his boots loud on the wooden floor. "I'm not buying her, I'm marrying her. Right now. And once we're married, her debts become mine. Blackwell, you can come collect from me up on Blackstone Ridge anytime you're feeling brave." He stopped in front of Evelyn. Up close, she was even more striking, sharp features, pale skin, and those eyes that cut straight through him. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Evelyn," she whispered. "Evelyn Mercer. You understand what's happening here? I'm being sold to a man who murdered my father." Gideon's jaw clenched. "Not anymore. You don't know me. Don't need to. I could be worse than him. You're not. How do you know?" "Because you're still standing." Something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like recognition. Gideon turned to the Reverend, who stood frozen like a deer. "Marry us." I cannot possibly. You married everyone else here without asking questions. You'll marry us too." "Mr. Hale, this is highly irregular." "Reverend," Gideon said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "I haven't touched another soul in 10 years. Haven't spoken to a human being except when I come down for supplies. Haven't lived among people since this town decided I was a monster worth exiling. But this woman is leaving with me today, one way or another. Now you can marry us legal and proper, or I can throw her over my shoulder and walk out of here. And you can explain to everyone how you let the mountain devil kidnap someone from your church." And Whitmore's face went white. Gideon looked back at Evelyn. "Your choice. Marry me or marry him." He jerked his head toward Blackwell. "But decide now." Evelyn's hands were shaking. Her breathing was shallow. She looked at Blackwell, at the man who'd killed her father and was about to own her completely. Then she looked at Gideon, at the scarred, wild stranger who'd walked into her nightmare and offered her a different hell. "Will you hurt me?" she asked. "No." "Will you lock me away?" "You'll have the whole mountain." "Will you force me?" "No," Gideon said again, harder this time. "Never." Evelyn closed her eyes, took a breath, opened them again. "Marry us," she said to the Reverend. Chaos erupted again. Blackwell was screaming. Cordell was reaching for his gun. Half the men in the pews were on their feet. Gideon didn't care. He reached out and took Evelyn's hand. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling, but she didn't pull away. "Do it now," he told Whitmore. The Reverend looked around frantically, but no help came. Finally, with shaking hands, he opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved..." "Skip to the vows," Gideon said. Whitmore swallowed hard. "Do you, Gideon Hail, take this woman?" "I do." "And do you, Evelyn Mercer?" "I do," she said, her voice stronger than Gideon expected. "Then by the power vested in me..." Blackwell lunged forward. "This is a farce. I won't allow..." Gideon moved faster than a man his size should have been able to. He turned, grabbed Blackwell by the collar with his free hand, and slammed the banker back against the altar hard enough to rattle the cross on the wall. "You're done here," Gideon said quietly. "You don't own her. You don't touch her. And if I find out you had anything to do with her father's death, I'll come back down this mountain and we'll have a conversation you won't walk away from." He released Blackwell, who stumbled backward, red-faced and sputtering. Gideon turned back to the Reverend. "Finish it." Whitmore's voice was barely a whisper. "I now pronounce you man and wife." And then, because he knew the town needed to see it, needed to understand that this wasn't a kidnapping or a trick, Gideon pulled Evelyn close and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was a claim, a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. When he pulled back, Evelyn's eyes were wide, her lips parted in shock. "We're leaving," he said. She nodded, still stunned. Gideon kept her hand in his and turned toward the door. The crowd parted like he was plague itself. No one tried to stop them. No one even spoke. Outside, the afternoon sun was blinding after the dim church. Gideon untied Judas, then lifted Evelyn onto the saddle like she weighed nothing. She gasped, but didn't fight him. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he said. "Where are we going?" "Home." He kicked Judas into a gallop, and they rode out of Red Hollow with the entire town watching. Behind them, Gideon could hear Blackwell screaming threats, Cordell shouting orders, chaos spreading like wildfire. He didn't look back. Book. The ride up Blackstone Ridge took 3 hours, and Evelyn didn't speak once. Gideon didn't push her. He kept Judas to a steady pace, one arm loose around her waist to keep her from sliding off the saddle. She sat rigid, her back straight, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. He could feel her fear. It radiated off her in waves. He didn't blame her. She'd just married a complete stranger, a man the town called a killer, a man who lived alone in the wilderness like an animal, a man with a reputation darker than his own shadow. For all she knew, she'd traded one monster for another, but she'd also chosen him. When given the option between certain hell and possible hell, she'd chosen possible. That had to count for something. The sun was low by the time they reached the cabin. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running cold and clear about 50 yards to the east. The structure itself was rough, logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney that leaked smoke, a door that hung slightly crooked. But it was solid. Gideon had built every inch of it himself, and it had kept him alive through 10 brutal winters. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Evelyn down. She hesitated before taking his hands, and when her feet touched the ground, she immediately stepped back, putting distance between them. "This is it," Gideon said, gesturing to the cabin. Evelyn looked around slowly, at the wild forest pressing in from all sides, at the mountains rising like teeth against the darkening sky, at the isolation so complete it felt like they'd ridden off the edge of the world. "How far are we from town?" she asked. 12 miles. 3 hours on horseback if you know the trail. 6 if you don't." "And you've lived here alone for 10 years? "Yes." "Why?" "Because the town wanted me gone." "And you just left?" Gideon's jaw tightened. Seemed better than hanging. Evelyn turned to face him. In the fading light, her eyes looked darker, more shadowed. "Did you kill that man?" "Yes." "Was it murder?" "No, but that didn't matter." "Why not?" "Because when you kill someone, people see what they want to see. They wanted to see a monster. So that's what I became." She studied him for a long moment. "Are you a monster?" "Yes." Gideon met her gaze steadily. "I don't know anymore. Maybe." "That's not a comforting answer." "Wasn't trying to comfort you." Evelyn's expression hardened. "Then what are you trying to do?" "Keep you alive. By dragging me to the middle of nowhere and making me your wife? You had a choice. Between you and Blackwell. That's not a choice. That's picking which gun to put to my head." Gideon felt something twist in his chest. She wasn't wrong. He'd stormed into that church like he had some kind of right, like he was saving her, when really all he'd done was trade one cage for another. "You want to leave?" he asked quietly. Evelyn blinked. "What?" "I'll take you back tomorrow. Tell them it was a mistake, annul the marriage. You can—" "And then what?" she interrupted. "Marry Blackwell anyway. Let him win. Let him get away with murdering my father and stealing everything we had." "You don't know he killed your father." "I do," she said fiercely. "My father was an expert horseman. He didn't just fall, and 3 days before he died, he told me he'd found proof that Blackwell was embezzling from the bank. He was going to report it, and then suddenly he's dead, and suddenly our debts are called in, and suddenly I'm being sold like cattle to the man who ruined us." Gideon felt that cold rage flicker to life again. "You have proof?" "No. My father hid his evidence somewhere before he died, but I never found it." "Then there's nothing we can do." "There's surviving," Evelyn said. "There's not letting him win. There's living long enough to figure out how to burn his whole empire down." Gideon almost smiled. Almost. "You're angrier than you look. I've spent the last 6 months being told to smile and be grateful while men decided my fate. Yes, I'm angry." "Good. Anger keeps you breathing." Evelyn wrapped her arms around herself. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it did in the mountains. "I'm cold." Come inside. He led her to the cabin, pushed open the door, and stepped into the dim interior. It wasn't much. One room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, a bed frame with a straw mattress, shelves holding supplies. No decoration, no comfort, just survival. Evelyn stood in the doorway, taking it all in. I'll get a fire going, Gideon said. You can take the bed.
Where will you sleep? Floor. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He crouched by the fireplace and started stacking kindling. You're my wife in name only. I'm not touching you, not forcing anything. When you're ready to leave, you leave. Until then, you're safe here. Safe, she repeated, like the word was foreign. Safe as you can be anywhere. She watched him work in silence. He could feel her eyes on him, studying, measuring, trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. The fire caught quickly, flames licking up the dry wood. Heat began to spread through the small space. There's food in the pantry, Gideon said without turning. Not much, but enough. I'll hunt tomorrow. I don't know how to cook. Then you'll learn. You're not going to do it for me? I'm not your servant. No, Evelyn said quietly. You're my husband. Gideon finally turns to look at her. She was standing with her back to the door, her face half in shadow, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked small, vulnerable. I didn't ask for this, she said. Neither did I. Then why did you do it? He wanted to tell her the truth, that he didn't know, that something in him had broken when he saw her standing on that altar, that he'd spent 10 years running from who he was and in one moment had thrown it all away for a stranger. But the words wouldn't come. Get some rest, he said instead. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Harder than today? Different hard. Evelyn nodded slowly. She walked to the bed, sat down on the edge, and stared at her hands. They were still trembling. Gideon grabbed a blanket from the shelf, spread it on the floor near the fire, and lay down with his back to her. The floor was hard and cold, but he'd slept on worse. Behind him, he heard her shift on the mattress, heard her breathing, shallow, uneven, the sound of someone trying not to cry. Gideon? She said softly. Yeah. Thank you. He closed his eyes. Don't thank me yet. Walt. Gideon woke to the sound of screaming. He was on his feet in seconds, knife in hand, heart pounding. The cabin was dark except for the dying embers of the fire, and standing in the middle of the room, shaking violently, was Evelyn. Hey, he said carefully. You're okay. She didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something he couldn't see. Nightmare. Gideon set the knife down and approached slowly. Evelyn, you're safe. You're in the cabin. He's here, she whispered. He's going to... No one's here, just us. I can see him. I can see him standing over my father. It's a dream. It's not, she choked out. It's real. It happened. He killed him and I couldn't stop it. Gideon did something he hadn't done in 10 years. He reached out and touched another person. He put his hand on her shoulder, gently, carefully, and felt her flinch under his palm. Breathe, he said, in and out, slow. Evelyn's eyes finally focused on him. Tears were streaming down her face. I can't, she gasped. I can't breathe. Yes, you can. In through your nose, out through your mouth. She tried, failed, tried again. Gideon kept his hand on her shoulder, steady and solid, and waited. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, her breathing evened out. The shaking subsided. The panic faded. Sorry, she whispered. Don't apologize. I woke you. I don't sleep much anyway. She looked up at him, her face blotchy and wet. Do you have nightmares too? Every night? About what? The man I killed. Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you regret it? Killing him? No. He was trying to kill me first. Then what do you regret? Gideon's hand fell away from her shoulder. That I wasn't faster, that I let it get that far, that I didn't see it coming. You can't control everything. No, but you can control enough. She studied his face in the dim firelight. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? A monster. Maybe I am.
Monsters don't have nightmares, Evelyn said. They give them. Gideon didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Eventually, Evelyn climbed back into bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Gideon returned to his spot on the floor. Gideon? She said again. Yeah. I'm glad it was you. He stared at the ceiling. Get some sleep, Evelyn. This time, she didn't answer. And this time, when Gideon closed his eyes, the nightmares stayed away. Morning came too bright and too cold. Evelyn woke to sunlight cutting through gaps in the cabin walls, and the smell of coffee so strong it made her eyes water. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache, her back from the straw mattress, her legs from hours in the saddle, her head from crying herself to sleep. She sat up slowly, disoriented. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, the church, the auction, the mountain man who'd claimed her like she was something worth saving. Gideon was already awake, standing at the table with his back to her. He was pouring coffee into 2 tin cups, his movements efficient and quiet. In the daylight, he looked even more massive than he had yesterday. His shoulders were broad enough to block half the window, his hands scarred and thick-knuckled. He'd changed his shirt. This one was cleaner but still worn, the fabric stretched tight across his back. Coffee, he said without turning around. Thank you. Her voice came out scratchy. He brought her a cup. The tin was hot enough to burn, but she took it anyway, wrapping both hands around the warmth. The coffee tasted like it had been made with creek water and anger, but it was strong, and it woke her up. Gideon sat down at the table with his own cup. We need to talk. About what? Rules. Evelyn almost laughed. Rules? You're living here now. You need to know how things work. I thought you said I could leave whenever I wanted. You can, but while you're here, there are things you need to understand. He took a drink of coffee, grimaced like it was poison. First rule, don't go wandering off alone. The mountain's not forgiving. You get lost, you die. You step wrong, you die. You run into the wrong animal, you die. Noted. Second rule, conserve everything. Water, food, firewood. Winter comes early up here and stays late. We run out of supplies, we starve. Anything else? Third rule, pull your weight. I'm not taking care of you like you're a child. You eat, you work. Evelyn set her cup down harder than she meant to. I'm not afraid of work. Good, because there's a lot of it. And what exactly will I be doing? Learning to survive. Gideon stood, walked to the shelf, and pulled down a worn leather jacket. Get dressed. We're going outside. Now? Unless you'd rather sit in here and feel sorry for yourself. She wanted to snap at him, to tell him he had no right to order her around, that she'd just escaped one cage and wasn't about to walk into another. But the truth was, she didn't want to sit in the cabin either. Didn't want to be alone with her thoughts and her fear and the crushing reality of what her life had become. So she stood, smoothed down her dress, the same one she'd been wearing yesterday, now wrinkled and dusty, and followed him outside. The morning air was sharp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. The sky was a blue so bright it hurt to look at, and everywhere Evelyn turned there were mountains, jagged peaks stretching in every direction, making her feel impossibly small. Beautiful, isn't it? Gideon said. Terrifying. Same thing up here. He led her around the side of the cabin to a small clearing where he'd set up what looked like a makeshift camp, a fire pit, a chopping block, a rack for drying meat. Beyond that was the creek, rushing fast and loud over smooth stones. First lesson, Gideon said, water. I know what water is. Do you know how to get it without getting yourself killed? Evelyn frowned. It's a creek? It's a creek that runs fast enough to sweep you off your feet and cold enough to stop your heart in 5 minutes. You go in there without thinking. You don't come back out. He picked up a wooden bucket from beside the fire pit. Watch. He walked to the creek's edge, crouched low, and dipped the bucket at an angle, letting the current fill it without pulling him forward. When it was full, he lifted it easily and carried it back. Your turn, he said, handing her the bucket. Evelyn took it. The bucket was heavier than it looked, and when she crouched by the water like he had, the current immediately tried to yank it from her hands. She tightened her grip, but the angle was wrong, and water sloshed everywhere. Slower, Gideon said from behind her. Don't fight the current, use it. She tried again. This time, the bucket filled halfway before she lost her balance and stumbled backward, landing hard on the rocks. Gideon didn't help her up. Again, it took 6 tries before she managed to fill the bucket without falling or losing half the water. By then her hands were numb from the cold and her dress was soaked, but she'd done it. Good, Gideon said. It was the first compliment he'd given her. They spent the next hour on what he called basic survival. He showed her how to build a fire using flint and steel, how to split kindling without taking off her fingers, how to recognize animal tracks in the mud. Every task was harder than it looked. Every mistake was a lesson learned the painful way. By the time the sun was high overhead, Evelyn was exhausted, filthy, and angrier than she'd been in months. "I thought we were done," she said when Gideon pulled a rifle from inside the cabin. "Not even close." "What now?" "Now you learn to shoot." Evelyn stared at the weapon. She'd never held a gun in her life. Her father had owned a pistol, but he'd kept it locked away, and after he died, Blackwell had confiscated it along with everything else. "I don't want to." "Don't care. You're learning anyway." "Why?" Gideon's expression hardened. "Because eventually someone's going to come looking for you. Maybe Blackwell. Maybe bounty hunters. Maybe just men who think a woman alone in the mountains is easy prey. And when they come, I might not be here. So you're going to know how to defend yourself." The weight of his words settled over her like a stone. He was right. Of course he was right. She'd been so focused on escaping one danger that she hadn't thought about all the others waiting in the shadows. "Fine," she said. "Show me." He handed her the rifle. It was heavier than she expected, the metal cold and unfamiliar in her hands. "Hold it like this," Gideon said, moving behind her. He adjusted her grip, his hands covering hers. "Stock against your shoulder. Eye down the sight. Breathe steady." "I'm breathing." "You're shaking." "It's heavy." "It's going to kick harder than you think. When you pull the trigger, don't jerk it. Squeeze slow and even." He stepped back, giving her space. Evelyn tried to focus on the target he'd set up, a piece of wood propped against a tree about 30 yards away, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "Any time," Gideon said. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to knock her back a step, and the bullet went wide, disappearing into the trees. "Terrible," Gideon said. "I've never done this before." "Then do it again." They practiced until her shoulder was bruised and her ears were ringing. Out of 20 shots, she hit the target twice, both times barely clipping the edge. It wasn't good, but it was something. When they finally went back inside, Evelyn collapsed onto the bed, too tired to care that she was tracking mud across the floor. Her hands were blistered. Her arms felt like dead weight. Every muscle in her body screamed for mercy. "Tomorrow, we'll work on accuracy," Gideon said, cleaning the rifle. "Tomorrow, I'm sleeping until noon. Tomorrow, you're getting up at dawn. You're cruel. I'm keeping you alive." Evelyn closed her eyes. "There's a difference?" "Not up here." She must have fallen asleep because when she opened her eyes again, the cabin was darker and something was cooking over the fire. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. Gideon was stirring a pot, his face shadowed. "Venison stew," he said without looking at her. "Not fancy, but it'll keep you going." "Where did you get venison?" "Killed a deer last week. Been preserving the meat." Evelyn sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in her back. "You hunt often?" "Every few days. Can't survive up here without it." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed her one. The bowl was wooden and rough, but the food was hot and thick, full of meat and wild onions. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. They ate in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin walls. Night was coming fast, the way it always did in the mountains. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said finally. "Depends on the question." "Why did you really marry me?" Gideon's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "I told you why." "You told me you were keeping me safe, but you don't know me. You don't owe me anything, so why risk everything for a stranger?" "Maybe I'm just stupid." "You're not stupid." "Then maybe I saw something worth saving. Or maybe you're just lonely." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Watch yourself." "It's been 10 years, hasn't it? 10 years without talking to anyone. 10 years without touching another person. That's not survival. That's punishment." You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Evelyn leaned forward. You exiled yourself because the town called you a monster, but maybe the real reason you stayed gone is because you believed them. Enough. And maybe when you saw me standing on that altar, you saw a chance to prove you weren't— I said enough. Gideon's voice cracked like thunder. Evelyn flinched but didn't back down. Did I hit too close? For a long moment, Gideon just stared at her. His eyes were dark and furious, but underneath the anger was something else. Something raw. You want the truth? He said quietly. Fine. I married you because for 10 years I've watched this world eat people alive, and I've done nothing about it. I've hidden in these mountains like a coward while men like Blackwell destroy everything they touch. And when I saw you standing there, trying so hard not to break, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could stop one bad thing from happening. That's it. That's the whole truth. I'm not a hero. I'm not saving you. I'm just trying to live with myself. Evelyn's throat tightened. That's more than most people would do. Is it? Yes. They didn't talk for the rest of the night, but when Evelyn lay down to sleep, she noticed that Gideon had added an extra blanket to her bed. And when she woke in the middle of the night from another nightmare, he was already there, sitting on the floor beside her with his back against the bed frame, keeping watch like he'd done it 100 times before. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But she felt safer than she had in months. The next few days fell into a brutal rhythm. Wake before dawn, fetch water, build fire, cook, learn, work, repeat. Gideon was a relentless teacher. He showed her how to skin a rabbit, how to set snares, how to read the weather by watching the sky. He taught her which plants were edible and which would kill her. He made her chop wood until her hands bled, then wrapped her blisters and made her do it again. You're enjoying this, Evelyn accused him on the 4th day, nursing her raw palms. I am, he admitted. Why? Because you're tougher than you think. I don't feel tough. You're still standing. That's tough enough. But it wasn't all work. In the evenings, after the chores were done and the cabin was warm, they'd sit by the fire and talk. Small things at first, the weather, the animals, the land. But slowly, carefully, they started sharing pieces of their lives. Evelyn told him about her father, about growing up in Red Hollow when it was still a decent town, about watching Blackwell slowly poison everything good until nothing was left but fear and debt. Gideon told her about the Voss family, about the land dispute that had turned violent, about the moment he'd pulled the trigger and watched a man die in front of him. Do you think about him? Evelyn asked one night. Every day. Do you wish you hadn't done it? No, but I wish it hadn't been necessary. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. On the 7th day, Gideon came back from checking his traps with his face grim and his rifle in hand. What's wrong? Evelyn asked. Tracks. Fresh ones. About 2 miles south. What kind of tracks? Horses. At least 3. Moving slow, like they're searching for something. Evelyn's blood went cold. Blackwell? Maybe, or bounty hunters. Either way, they're looking. What do we do? We prepare. Gideon started loading extra ammunition into his saddlebags. If they find this place, things are going to get bad fast. How bad? He looked at her. How good are you with that rifle now? Better than I was. That's not good enough. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the cabin. Gideon nailed shutters over the windows, stacked firewood against the walls for extra protection, and showed Evelyn how to reload the rifle in under 30 seconds. If shooting starts, he said, you get behind the bed and you don't move until I tell you. Understand? I'm not hiding while you're hiding because if something happens to me, you're the only one left to tell people what Blackwell did. You're the witness. You're the proof, so you stay alive no matter what. Evelyn wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. That night, neither of them slept. They sat by the fire with the rifle between them, listening to every sound outside. Every branch snap, every animal call, every shift of the wind. If they come tomorrow, Evelyn said quietly, what will you do? Stop them. You can't fight 3 men alone. I've fought worse. That doesn't mean you'll win. Gideon's hand rested on the rifle. Doesn't mean I'll lose either. You're not afraid? I'm terrified. But fear doesn't change what needs doing. Evelyn looked at him, at this scarred, broken man who'd walked into her nightmare and refused to let her drown. I don't want you to die for me.
Then don't give me a reason to. The sun rose slow and red, painting the mountains the color of blood. Gideon was already outside, watching the tree line with the rifle cradled in his arms. Evelyn joined him, her own weapon feeling heavier than usual. "See anything?" she asked. "Not yet."
Maybe they turned back. Maybe. But an hour later, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses moving through the forest. Gideon's entire body went rigid. "Get inside." "Gideon, now!" Evelyn ran for the cabin, her heart hammering. She grabbed the rifle, checked the ammunition, and positioned herself behind the bed like he'd shown her. Through the gap in the shutters, she could see Gideon standing in the clearing, alone and still, waiting. 3 riders emerged from the trees. The first was Deputy Marshal Cordell, looking pale and nervous. The second was a man Evelyn didn't recognize, tall and thin with a scarred face and dead eyes. A bounty hunter, probably. The third rider was Silas Blackwell. He sat his horse like a king surveying conquered land, his expensive coat spotless despite the rough journey. When he saw Gideon, his smile was all teeth. "Mr. Hail," Blackwell called out. "What a pleasure." "Turn around," Gideon said flatly. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, you have something that belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to you. She's my wife." "A marriage conducted under duress. Hardly legal." "Legal enough." Blackwell's smile faded. "This can go easy or hard, Hale. Your choice. There's a third option." "Which is?" "You leave now while you still can." The bounty hunter laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "Big talk for one man. Who says I'm alone?" All 3 men tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. From inside the cabin, Evelyn understood what Gideon was doing. He was bluffing, making them think he had help, buying time. But it wasn't going to work. She could see it in Blackwell's eyes, the calculation, the certainty, the knowledge that he had the numbers. "Last chance, Hale," Blackwell said. "Bring out the girl." "No." "Then we'll take her." The bounty hunter drew his gun, and Evelyn made a decision that changed everything. She kicked open the cabin door and stepped outside with the rifle raised. "You want me?" she shouted. "Here I am." All 3 men turned to stare at her. Gideon's face went white. "Evelyn, get back inside." "No." She walked forward, the rifle steady in her hands. "I'm done hiding." Blackwell's eyes gleamed with triumph. "There's my bride." "I'm not your bride. I'm his wife. Legal and witnessed by half the town. A technicality we can fix." "No, you can't. Because I'll tell everyone the truth. About my father. About the embezzlement. About every dirty thing you've done. You have no proof." "Don't I?" Evelyn's heart was racing, but she kept her voice steady. "My father was thorough. He kept records, and before he died, he told me where to find them." It was a lie. A complete, desperate lie. But Blackwell didn't know that. His face went hard. "You're bluffing. Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. The clearing was silent, except for the wind in the trees. Then Cordell shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Blackwell, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Blackwell's hand moved toward his coat. Gideon's rifle came up fast. "Don't." "You won't shoot. You're not a killer anymore." "Wrong. I'm exactly who I've always been." The bounty hunter drew. Gideon fired first. The shot echoed like thunder across the mountains. The bounty hunter fell from his horse, clutching his shoulder, screaming. His gun landed in the dirt. Cordell's horse reared, throwing the deputy to the ground. He scrambled backward, hands raised. "I'm out! I'm out!" That left Blackwell. He sat frozen, his hand still inside his coat. Gideon chambered another round. "You were saying?" Blackwell's face was purple with rage, but he slowly pulled his hand free. Empty. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yes, it is. You come back here, I'll kill you. You send more men, I'll kill them too. You so much as think about her again, I'll ride down to Red Hollow and put a bullet through your skull in front of the whole town." "You're threatening me?" "I'm making a promise." Blackwell looked at Evelyn. "You'll regret this." "I already regret ever knowing you." He yanked his horse around and spurred it into the trees. Cordell scrambled onto his own mount and followed. The wounded bounty hunter dragged himself up and stumbled after them, leaving a trail of blood. When they were gone, Evelyn's legs finally gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, the rifle falling from her hands. Gideon was beside her in seconds. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking I wasn't going to let you die alone." "I told you to stay inside." "And I told you I'm done hiding. You could have been killed. So could you." They stared at each other, breathing hard, adrenaline still crackling through their veins. Then Gideon did something Evelyn never expected. He started laughing. It was a rough, rusty sound, like machinery that hadn't run in years. But it was real. "You're insane," he said. "I learned from the best. You lied about having proof." "I know." "And you stepped out there anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Because you stood up for me when no one else would. Because you gave me a chance to fight back. Because for the first time in my life, someone treated me like I was worth something." Gideon's smile faded. "You are worth something." "I'm starting to believe that." He held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. They stood there in the clearing, hands still clasped, the morning sun warm on their faces. "They'll come back," Evelyn said. "I know. What do we do?" "We get ready, and next time we fight together." Evelyn nodded. Together. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. That hope lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning after Blackwell's retreat, Evelyn woke to find Gideon standing at the window with tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the darkness under his eyes, and the way his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "Smoke, South Ridge, maybe 5 miles out." She joined him at the window. Sure enough, a thin column of gray rose against the dawn sky, too straight and controlled to be natural. "Could be travelers," she said, knowing it wasn't. "Could be, but travelers don't camp that close to someone else's territory without announcing themselves." He turned away from the window, started checking his rifle. "They're setting up a perimeter, watching us." "How many?" "Can't tell from here, but enough to feel confident." Evelyn's stomach twisted. "What do we do?" "We don't panic, and we don't give them what they want." "Which is?" "For us to run scared, make a mistake." Gideon loaded ammunition into his pockets. "They're trying to flush us out. It's working." "No, it's not, because we're not leaving this cabin unless we have to." But staying put felt like waiting for the noose to tighten. Evelyn spent the day pacing the small space, jumping at every sound, her rifle never more than arm's length away. Gideon remained calm, methodical, checking their supplies and fortifications like he was preparing for a siege. By nightfall, 2 more smoke columns had appeared, one to the east, one to the west. "They've got us surrounded," Evelyn said. "Not surrounded, boxed in. There's a difference." "What difference?" "Surrounded means no way out. Boxed in means they're watching the easy routes and hoping we're stupid enough to take them." "And if we're not stupid?" Gideon's smile was grim. "Then we get creative." That night they took turns keeping watch again. When it was Evelyn's shift, she sat by the window with the rifle across her lap and watched the darkness beyond the clearing. The smoke was invisible now, but she knew it was there. New men were out there somewhere, waiting. She thought about her father, about how he'd faced Blackwell's threats with quiet courage, gathering evidence even as the walls closed in, about how he'd died trying to do the right thing, and how no one had cared enough to ask questions. Her hand tightened on the rifle. She'd lied to Blackwell about having proof. But somewhere out there, her father's evidence existed. It had to. He'd told her he'd hidden it somewhere safe, somewhere even Blackwell couldn't reach. The problem was, he'd died before telling her where. "You're thinking too loud," Gideon said from the darkness behind her. She jumped. "I thought you were sleeping." "Can't." He came to sit beside her, his presence solid and oddly comforting. "What's on your mind?" "My father's evidence, the records he kept." "The ones you told Blackwell about?" "I wasn't completely lying. My father did keep records. He was meticulous about everything, dates, numbers, transactions. He told me 3 days before he died that he'd found proof of Blackwell's embezzlement, but he never told me where he hid it." "Smart man. Blackwell probably figured the same thing. That's why he had to kill him before he could talk." "So the proof is out there somewhere. But it might as well not exist if we can't find it." Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Where would your father hide something he didn't want Blackwell to find? I don't know. We lost our house after he died. Blackwell's men went through everything. What about places outside the house? Somewhere personal? Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to remember. Her father had been a creature of habit. He'd had his favorite spots, the bench outside the general store where he'd smoke his pipe, the creek where he'd taught her to fish, the old oak tree at the edge of town where her mother was buried. Her eyes snapped open. The cemetery. What about it? My mother's grave. My father visited every Sunday, rain or shine. He'd sit there for hours talking to her like she could hear him. Her heart started racing. If he wanted to hide something in a place Blackwell would never think to look, somewhere meaningful, it's worth checking. But we can't get there. Not with Blackwell's men watching every route down the mountain. We can't get there the easy way, Gideon corrected. But there's a back trail. Follows the North Ridge, comes out about 2 miles west of Red Hollow. It's rough as hell and takes twice as long, but it's not on any map. When do we leave? We don't. I go alone. Absolutely not. Evelyn, no. We're in this together, remember? You said it yourself. That was before they surrounded us. If something goes wrong, if I don't come back, then we both don't come back. But I'm not sitting here waiting while you risk your neck for my father's secrets. She met his eyes in the darkness. Besides, you need me. You don't know which grave to look for or what to look for when you get there. Gideon's jaw worked. She could see him fighting with himself, trying to find an argument that would work. Finally, he let out a long breath. You follow every order I give, no questions, no arguments. Agreed. And if shooting starts, you run. You don't try to be a hero. I'll run right after you do. I'm serious, so am I. He shook his head, but there was something almost like respect in his eyes. You're going to get us both killed. Or we're going to finish what my father started. They left 2 hours before dawn, when the world was at its darkest, and the men watching them would be at their most tired. Gideon led Judas by hand instead of riding, moving through the forest like a ghost. Evelyn followed close behind, trying to match his quiet steps and failing miserably. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot to her ears. The North Trail was exactly as brutal as Gideon had promised. It climbed steep and narrow through loose rock, skirted cliff edges that made Evelyn's head spin, and wound through dense pine forests so thick the darkness felt solid. Twice they had to backtrack when the path disappeared entirely. Once, Judas nearly lost his footing and would have taken them all down the mountainside if Gideon hadn't grabbed his bridle with both hands and held firm. By the time the sun rose, they were exhausted, scratched bloody by branches, and still miles from Red Hollow. How much further? Evelyn asked, her voice barely a whisper. 3, maybe 4 hours if we're lucky. And if we're not? Then we're still walking when night falls, and this trail gets a lot more dangerous in the dark. They pushed on. The morning warmed slowly, fog lifting from the valleys below to reveal the patchwork of farmland and forest surrounding Red Hollow. From this height, the town looked small and harmless, like a child's toy. Evelyn knew better. Around midday, they stopped beside a narrow creek to rest and water the horse. Evelyn's feet were blistered inside her boots, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Gideon looked barely winded, but she noticed he favored his left side when he thought she wasn't watching. You're hurt, she said. Old injury. Acts up on long walks. From what? Wolf. About 6 years back. Got me in the ribs before I got it in the skull. You killed a wolf with your bare hands? With a knife. It was kill or be killed. He said it like it was nothing, like fighting off wild animals was just another Tuesday. Does it hurt? Only when I breathe. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. You have a terrible sense of humor. I know. They reached the outskirts of Red Hollow just as the sun started its descent. Gideon left Judas tied in a grove of trees about a mile out, then led Evelyn through a network of gullies and old cattle paths that kept them hidden from the main road. The cemetery sat on a low hill north of town, surrounded by an iron fence that had rusted to the color of dried blood. White headstones dotted the grass like broken teeth. A few had flowers on them, wilted and brown. Most had nothing at all. Which one? Gideon asked. Far corner, under the willow tree. They moved through the graves, keeping low, using the headstones for cover.
Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound made Evelyn's heart jump. Her mother's grave was exactly as she remembered, a simple white stone with her name and dates carved clean and straight. Sarah Mercer, beloved wife and mother. The willow above it had grown larger, its branches hanging down like curtains. Evelyn knelt beside the grave, her throat tight. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry I haven't visited." "We don't have time for grief," Gideon said quietly. Where would he hide it? Evelyn forced herself to focus. The grave itself was undisturbed, no signs of digging. The headstone was solid, but at the base, partially hidden by overgrown grass, she spotted something, a loose brick in the small border wall that surrounded the plot. "There," she whispered. Gideon pried it loose. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside that space was an oilcloth bundle. Evelyn's hands shook as she unwrapped it. Inside were papers, dozens of them, covered in her father's precise handwriting. Ledgers, account numbers, dates and transactions, and a letter addressed to her. She didn't have time to read it, but one line caught her eye, written larger than the rest. "Trust the mountain man. He still has honor when others don't." Her breath caught. "What is it?" Gideon asked. "He knew. My father knew about you. Knew you'd help me." "That's impossible. I never spoke to your father." "But he knew you anyway." She looked up at Gideon. "He knew what kind of man you really were." Before Gideon could respond, voices echoed from the cemetery entrance. They both froze. "Check every grave," a man's voice called out. "Blackwell said they might come here." Gideon grabbed Evelyn's wrist, pulled her behind the willow tree. Through the hanging branches, they could see 4 men spreading out through the cemetery, rifles in hand. "We're trapped," Evelyn whispered. "Not yet." Gideon's eyes scanned the area, calculating. "See that wall on the south side? About 60 yards. "Yes." "On my signal, you run for it. Don't look back, don't stop, just run. There's a gap in the stones big enough to squeeze through." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." "Liar." His jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you're going to stay here and fight them off so I can escape." "I'm not stupid, Gideon." "Then don't be stupid now. Those papers are what matters. Get them to someone who can use them. I don't know anyone in this town I can trust." "Then ride to the territorial capital. Find a judge. Find anyone." "Not without you." The voices were getting closer. They had maybe 30 seconds before they were discovered. Gideon's hand cupped her face, rough and gentle at the same time. "Listen to me. Your father died protecting this evidence. Don't let that be for nothing. And you? What about you? I've been dead for 10 years already. This is just making it official." "Don't say that." "Run," he said. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like the kiss in the church. That one had been for show, a performance. This one was real, desperate and fierce and full of everything they hadn't said to each other. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt like forever. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. "Run, now." He stepped out from behind the willow tree, rifle raised. "Looking for someone?" he called out. The 4 men spun toward him. Evelyn saw their faces. Hard men, the kind who killed for money and slept fine afterward. The first shot rang out. Evelyn ran. She ran like the devil himself was chasing her, clutching the oilcloth bundle to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, gunfire erupted, a thunderstorm of violence that echoed across the cemetery. She didn't look back. She'd promised herself she wouldn't. But halfway to the wall, she heard Gideon scream. Her feet stopped moving. Every instinct screamed at her to keep running, to do what he'd told her, to save the evidence and herself. But she'd told him they were in this together. She turned around. Gideon was on the ground, blood spreading across his shoulder, trying to reload with hands that wouldn't work right. 3 men were closing in on him, rifles aimed. Evelyn raised her own rifle, the one Gideon had made her carry despite her protests, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough. The 3 men scattered, diving for cover behind headstones. "I told you to run," Gideon roared, "and I told you I'm done following orders." She fired again, this time clipping one of the men in the leg. Gideon managed to get his rifle loaded. He shot from the ground, taking down another man with a shot to the chest. That left 2. They were pinned down, outgunned, and Gideon was bleeding badly. This was how it ended, both of them dying in a cemetery, fighting for evidence no one might ever see. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade.
Lower your weapons! Everyone froze. A man stepped into the cemetery, older, gray-haired, wearing a long coat and a badge that caught the dying sunlight. His face was hard and weathered, the kind of face that had seen everything and been disappointed by most of it. I said lower your weapons, he repeated. One of Blackwell's men started to aim at him. The stranger drew his pistol faster than Evelyn could follow and shot the rifle out of the man's hands. Next one goes through your skull, he said calmly. Now I'll ask one more time. Lower your weapons. The remaining man dropped his rifle. The stranger looked at Gideon and Evelyn. You two, with me, now. Who the hell are you? Gideon asked, still aiming at him. Territorial Judge Marcus Webb. And unless you want to bleed out in this cemetery, you'll shut up and follow me. Evelyn helped Gideon to his feet. He was heavy, leaning on her hard, blood soaking through his shirt. They stumbled after the judge, who led them to a carriage waiting on the road. Get in, Webb ordered. Why are you helping us? Evelyn asked. Because I've been investigating Silas Blackwell for 2 months, and I need witnesses who aren't terrified to talk. Now get in before his other men show up. They climbed into the carriage. Webb snapped the reins, and they lurched into motion. Evelyn pressed her hand against Gideon's shoulder, trying to slow the bleeding. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Stay with me, she said. Wasn't planning on going anywhere. You got shot. I noticed. You could have died, but I didn't. Because I came back. He looked at her, his eyes unfocused with pain. You should have kept running, and you should stop telling me what to do. Despite everything, he smiled. Fair enough. The carriage raced through Red Hollow's outskirts, heading toward the better part of town where the judge had his office. Evelyn could see people stopping to stare, could hear the whispers starting. Webb pulled up outside a solid brick building with Territorial Court painted on the window. Inside, he said, and bring those papers you're holding like they're made of gold. They might as well be, Evelyn said. They made it inside just as a crowd started to gather. Webb slammed the door, locked it, and pulled the curtains. Let me see those papers, he said. Evelyn handed them over, then turned her attention to Gideon. His shoulder was a mess, but the bullet had gone clean through. She tore strips from her dress and wrapped them tight, trying to ignore his sharp intakes of breath. I'm sorry, she whispered. For what? Getting you shot. You didn't pull the trigger. I might as well have. Evelyn. He caught her hand, held it tight. I'd take a dozen bullets if it meant keeping you safe. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Probably. Webb looked up from the papers, his face unreadable. Where did you get these? My father, Evelyn said. He was investigating Blackwell before he died. And how did he die? Blackwell killed him, made it look like an accident. Can you prove that? No. But those papers prove the embezzlement. They prove Blackwell's been stealing from the bank for years. Webb set the papers down carefully. Miss Mercer, these documents are explosive. If they're authentic, and preliminary examination suggests they are, Silas Blackwell is looking at 20 years in federal prison minimum. Then arrest him. It's not that simple. Blackwell has powerful friends. The territorial governor, half the legislature, every wealthy man from here to the Capitol. I can't just— Yes, you can, Gideon interrupted. His voice was rough with pain but steady. You're a judge. You have the authority. And if you don't use it, then every minute my wife and I spent running from his men was for nothing. Webb's eyes narrowed. Your wife? Legal and binding. I heard about that. Heard a lot of things about you, Mr. Hale. I'm sure you did. Most people say you're a killer. Most people are right. And yet here you are, bleeding in my office, protecting this woman instead of hiding in your mountain. Webb studied him. Why? Gideon's hand tightened on Evelyn's. Because someone had to. For a long moment, Webb said nothing. Then he stood, walked to his desk, and pulled out a pen and paper. I'm issuing a warrant for Silas Blackwell's arrest, he said, along with warrants for Deputy Marshal Cordell and anyone else who aided him. But you two need to understand something. The moment I sign this, there's no going back. Blackwell will know who provided the evidence. His friends will come after you with everything they have. Let them, Evelyn said. You sure about that? I'm sure about finishing what my father started. Webb signed the warrant with quick, decisive strokes. Then he looked at them both. Stay here tonight. I'll have my men bring Blackwell in by morning. After that, he shrugged. Well, we'll see what happens after that. That night, they stayed in a small room above the courthouse. Gideon's shoulder was properly bandaged by a doctor Webb trusted, and he'd been given something for the pain that made him drowsy and loose-tongued. "You came back," he said again, staring at the ceiling. "I know. I told you to run. I don't follow orders well. I noticed." He turned his head to look at her. "Thank you. For disobeying you? For not leaving me to die alone." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I couldn't." "Why not?" She didn't have a good answer. Or maybe she did, but saying it out loud felt too big, too real. Instead, she took his hand and held it. "Get some sleep," she said. "Will you be here when I wake up?" "Where else would I go?" He smiled faintly. Good. Within minutes, he was asleep, his breathing deep and even. Evelyn sat beside the bed, watching him. This man who'd walked into her nightmare and refused to let her drown. This man who'd been called a monster for so long he'd started to believe it himself. This man who'd taken a bullet for her without hesitation. Somewhere between this church and the mountain and this moment, something had changed between them. What started as a desperate bargain had become something else, something neither of them had names for yet. But it was real. And tomorrow, when the sun rose and Blackwell was dragged through the streets in chains, the whole territory would see it. Dawn broke ugly over Red Hollow, the sky bruised purple and gray like something had beaten it bloody during the night. Evelyn hadn't slept. She'd sat in the chair beside Gideon's bed, watching him breathe, listening to the sounds of the town waking up beyond the courthouse walls. Voices in the street, horses, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer starting early, and underneath it all, a tension so thick she could taste it. Gideon stirred around sunrise, his eyes opening slowly. For a moment he looked confused, like he'd forgotten where he was. Then his gaze found her and something settled in his face. "You're still here," he said. "Told you I would be." He pushed himself up with a grunt of pain, his bandaged shoulders stiff. "How long was I out?" 6 hours, maybe 7. "Feel like 6 minutes. He tested his arm, wincing. "Can't shoot worth a damn like this." "Then don't shoot. Not sure that's an option today." Before Evelyn could answer, heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. Judge Webb appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "He's here," Webb said. "Blackwell?" Evelyn stood quickly. "Along with half his hired guns and a lawyer from the Capitol. He's downstairs demanding to see me, threatening lawsuits, making noise about false arrest and political persecution." Webb's mouth twitched. "Man's got some nerve, I'll give him that." "Are you going to let him go?" Gideon asked. "Hell no, but this is going to get messy." Webb looked at Evelyn. "He's asking for you specifically, wants to face his accuser." "Then let him. You don't have to do this. I can hold the hearing without you present." "No." Evelyn's voice was steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I want to look him in the eye when you read those charges." Webb studied her for a long moment. "You're braver than you look, girl." "I'm not brave. I'm just done being afraid." They went downstairs together, Gideon moving slow but upright, refusing Evelyn's offered arm. The courthouse's main chamber was packed, townspeople crammed into every corner, standing on benches, pressing against the walls. The air was thick with sweat and anticipation. At the front, flanked by 2 armed guards, stood Silas Blackwell. He looked immaculate despite spending the night in a cell. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his suit pressed, his face composed into an expression of dignified outrage. But when his eyes landed on Evelyn, something cold and vicious flashed behind them. "There she is," Blackwell said loudly, "the ungrateful girl who repays kindness with lies and slander." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwell," Webb ordered, taking his place behind the judge's bench. "I will not sit down. I demand to know the charges against me. I demand to face my accuser. I demand—" Webb slammed his gavel so hard it cracked the wood. "You'll sit down and shut your mouth, or I'll have you gagged and chained to that chair. Your choice." The room went silent. Blackwell's face flushed purple, but he sat. Webb pulled out the papers Evelyn had found. "Silas Blackwell, you're charged with embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and corruption of public office. Evidence has been presented showing a pattern of theft from Red Hollow savings and trusts spanning 8 years, totaling over $40,000. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 40,000 was more money than most of these people would see in their lifetimes.
That's ridiculous, Blackwell sputtered. Those documents are forgeries, lies manufactured by Thomas Mercer, Webb interrupted. A bank clerk with 20 years of spotless service who kept meticulous records until his suspicious death 6 months ago. He held up one of the pages. This is his handwriting. I verified it against bank documents you yourself signed, unless you're suggesting Mr. Mercer somehow forged his own murder.
Blackwell's lawyer, a thin man with spectacles, leaned forward. Your Honor, without Mr. Mercer available to testify, these documents are hearsay at best. They're evidence, documented, dated, and corroborated by bank transactions I can subpoena. Webb's eyes were hard. But let's talk about Thomas Mercer's death. Ruled an accident. Horse threw him, broke his neck. Convenient, wasn't it? 3 days after he told his daughter he'd found proof of your crimes? You have no proof I was involved in that. Not yet, but I will. Webb looked at Evelyn. Miss Mercer, tell the court what your father told you before he died. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She gripped the railing in front of her to steady them. My father came home 3 days before he died. He said he'd discovered irregularities in the bank's accounts. Money disappearing, being moved between accounts, hidden in false ledgers. He said Mr. Blackwell was stealing from depositors and covering it up. Lies, Blackwell hissed. He was going to report it, Evelyn continued, her voice getting stronger. He was going to bring the evidence to the territorial authorities. And then he died. And suddenly all our family's debts were called in, and I was being sold to the man who killed him. I killed no one. Then explain the ledgers, Webb said. Explain the missing money. Explain why 6 other families who questioned your business practices have conveniently lost their homes to foreclosure in the past 3 years. Business is business, not my fault if people can't pay their debts. Debts you manufactured, Gideon said from beside Evelyn. His voice cut through the room like a blade. You prey on desperate people, loan them money they can't repay, then take everything they have when they fail. That's not business. That's robbery with paperwork. Blackwell's eyes locked on him with pure hatred. And who are you to lecture me on morality? A murderer hiding in the mountains. A coward who ran instead of facing justice. I faced justice 10 years ago. The town decided I was guilty before any trial happened, so I left. But you? Gideon took a step forward despite the pain it clearly caused. You've been stealing from this town for years and everyone was too scared to stop you. Well, I'm not scared. Neither am I, Evelyn said. Blackwell laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You should be, both of you. Do you know what happens to people who cross me? Ask the Mercer girl's father. Oh wait, you can't. He's dead. The room exploded. People were shouting, guards were moving, Webb was hammering his gavel, and Gideon was lunging forward, his good hand reaching for Blackwell's throat. It took 3 men to hold him back. Did you just confess to murder in my courtroom? Webb said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Blackwell's face went white. His lawyer grabbed his arm, whispering frantically, but the damage was done. I didn't mean it was a figure of speech. It was a confession, Webb said, and I'm adding it to the charges. He looked at the guards. Take him to the territorial prison, maximum security, no bail. You can't do this. Blackwell was on his feet, struggling against the guards. I have rights. I have friends. The governor himself. The governor just received a copy of these documents by courier this morning, Webb said calmly, along with a formal request for a full investigation into corruption in Red Hollow. He's already disavowed any connection to you. You're alone, Blackwell. For the first time since Evelyn had known him, Silas Blackwell looked truly afraid. The guards dragged him toward the door. He fought every step, screaming threats and curses. The crowd parted to let them through, faces ranging from shock to satisfaction to grim pleasure. As Blackwell passed Evelyn, he spat in her direction. This isn't over. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you... Gideon's fist connected with Blackwell's jaw so fast Evelyn barely saw it happen. The banker dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. Now it's over, Gideon said, shaking out his knuckles. The crowd erupted in cheers. Webb just sighed and waved the guards on. Get him out of here before Hale kills him, and I have to arrest everyone in this room. They carried Blackwell's limp body out. The door slammed behind them. The courthouse chamber was still packed, but the energy had shifted. People were looking at Evelyn and Gideon differently now, not with fear or suspicion, but with something that might have been respect. Webb stood. This court is adjourned. The territory will conduct a full audit of Red Hollow Savings and Trust. Any depositors who lost money to Blackwell's schemes will be compensated from his personal assets. Justice will be served. He brought the gavel down one final time. The crowd began to disperse, people filing out into the street, already spreading the news. Evelyn stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It felt unreal. After months of powerlessness, after watching Blackwell destroy her family with impunity, to see him dragged away in chains. "You all right?" Gideon asked quietly. "I don't know. I think so." She looked at him. "Did that really just happen?" "Yeah." "My father's vindicated." "He is." "Blackwell's finished." Completely. Evelyn felt her knees go weak. Gideon caught her arm, steadied her. "I need air," she whispered. He led her outside. The morning sun was bright after the dim courthouse, and the street was chaos, people arguing, celebrating, demanding answers. But Gideon guided her away from the crowd, down a side street to a quiet spot behind the general store where they could breathe. Evelyn leaned against the wall, her eyes burning with tears she couldn't quite shed. "It's done," she said. "It's actually done." "It is. So why don't I feel different?" "Because revenge doesn't fix anything. It just stops the bleeding." "Is that what this was? Revenge?" "Justice," Gideon corrected. "There's a difference. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Justice is about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." Evelyn looked at him. "When did you get so wise?" 10 years alone gives you a lot of time to think." "About what?" "About the difference between being a monster and becoming one. About whether killing a man makes you evil or whether evil is letting evil go unchallenged." He leaned against the wall beside her. "I spent a decade hiding because I thought that made me better than the violence I'd committed. But watching Blackwell try to buy you, watching him destroy everything your father built, I realized something." "What?" "Hiding isn't redemption. It's just cowardice with better scenery. You're not a coward." "I was. For 10 years. But you—" He shook his head. "You walked into that courtroom knowing Blackwell could still win, knowing he could destroy you, and you did it anyway. That's courage. Or stupidity. Same thing, usually." This time Evelyn did smile. "We make a good pair, then." "Yeah, we do." They stood there in the quiet, letting the chaos of the town wash over them from a distance. Evelyn realized with a strange jolt that this was the first moment of peace she'd felt since her father died. No running, no fear, no looking over her shoulder, just quiet. "What happens now?" she asked. "We go home." "To the cabin?" "Unless you want to stay in town." Evelyn thought about it. Thought about Red Hollow and all its painful memories. Thought about the people who'd watched her father die and done nothing, who'd let Blackwell rule through fear. Then she thought about the mountain, about the creek and the trees and the cabin that smelled like pine smoke and coffee, about the hard work and the silence and the man beside her who'd given her a chance to fight back. "I want to go home," she said. Gideon nodded. "Then we go home." They were halfway to the stable to collect Judas when a voice called out behind them. "Mr. Hale! Miss Mercer! Wait!" They turned to see Judge Webb jogging toward them, his coat flapping. "Leaving already?" he asked when he caught up. "Our business here is done," Gideon said. "Not quite." Webb pulled a folded document from his coat. "This is a full pardon, signed by me and countersigned by the territorial governor. It clears you of any charges related to the death of Jacob Voss 10 years ago." Gideon stared at the paper like it might bite him. "I don't need that." "Maybe not, but you deserve it. I reviewed the case files. It was self-defense. The Voss family was trying to kill you over a land dispute. You defended yourself. That's not murder. The town didn't see it that way." "The town was wrong." Webb held out the pardon. "Take it. Build a life without that hanging over you." Slowly Gideon reached out and took the document. His hand was steady, but Evelyn could see the emotion working behind his eyes. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Thank your wife. She's the one who reminded me what justice is supposed to look like." Webb tipped his hat to Evelyn. "You ever need anything, Miss Mercer? You let me know."
It's Mrs. Hale now, Evelyn said. Webb smiled. My mistake. Mrs. Hale. He walked away, leaving them standing in the street with a piece of paper that changed everything. Gideon unfolded it, read it slowly. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. I'm free, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. You were always free. This just makes it official. No, I've been a prisoner for 10 years, prisoner of guilt, of shame, of what people thought I was. He folded the pardon carefully and tucked it inside his coat. Now I'm free. They collected Judas from the stable and rode out of Red Hollow as the sun climbed higher. People watched them go, some with gratitude, some with lingering suspicion, most with simple curiosity. Evelyn didn't care about any of them. She was going home. The ride back to the cabin took most of the day. They went slow, partly because of Gideon's shoulder, and partly because there was no reason to hurry. The men who'd been watching the mountain were gone, scattered when word of Blackwell's arrest spread. The territory was theirs again. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the cabin in the clearing below, Evelyn felt something in her chest ease. It wasn't much to look at. The walls were rough, the roof sagged slightly on one side, and there were gaps in the chinking that would need fixing before winter. But it was home. Gideon helped her down from the horse, both of them moving slow and sore. They stood there in the clearing, breathing in the mountain air, listening to the creek rush by. I should check the traps, Gideon said. See what we lost while we were gone. That can wait. Firewood needs splitting. That can wait too. He looked at her. What can't wait? Evelyn stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. This. She kissed him. Not like in the cemetery, desperate and afraid. Not like in the church, performed for an audience. This was different. This was choosing him without fear or obligation or anything except the simple truth that she wanted to. Gideon froze for half a second. Then his good arm came around her waist, pulling her close, and he kissed her back like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We should talk about this, he said. Talk about what? What this is. What we are. We're married. In name. We never... He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. I never asked what you wanted from this. From me. Evelyn took his hand, the one that had held a rifle and split wood, and pulled her from danger more times than she could count. I want this to be real. It is real. No, I mean, the marriage. Us. I don't want it to be just survival anymore. What do you want it to be? She thought about the question. Thought about everything they'd been through. The church, the mountain, the fights, the fear, the moments of quiet between the chaos. Thought about how this scarred, broken man had given her back her courage. I want it to be a choice, she said finally. Not something we fell into because we were desperate. I want to choose you, and I want you to choose me. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, gentle and deliberate. I choose you, he said. I chose you the moment I saw you standing on that altar. I just didn't know how to say it. You're saying it now. Yeah, I am. He pulled her close again, and this time when he kissed her, it felt like a promise. They went inside as the sun started to set. The cabin was cold and dusty from being empty, but Gideon got a fire going while Evelyn unpacked their few supplies. It felt strange and wonderful and ordinary all at once, this quiet domesticity after everything they'd survived. That night they didn't sleep on opposite sides of the room. Evelyn climbed into bed beside Gideon, fitting herself against his uninjured side, her head on his chest. His arm came around her, holding her close. This okay? He asked quietly. Yes. You sure? Gideon, I watched you take a bullet for me. I think we're past the point of awkward uncertainty. She felt his chest rumble with quiet laughter. Fair point. Besides, it's cold. Body heat is practical. Very practical. Strictly survival-based decision-making. Obviously. They lay there in the darkness, listening to the fire crackle and the wind move through the pines outside. Evelyn, Gideon said after a while. Yeah? I love you. The words hung in the air, simple and terrifying and perfect. Evelyn's throat tightened. No one had said those words to her since her mother died.
She'd forgotten what they felt like. "I love you too," she whispered. His arm tightened around her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn fell asleep feeling safe. The weeks that followed were the best of Evelyn's life. They fell into a rhythm, working together, surviving together, building something that felt like a real marriage instead of a desperate bargain. Gideon taught her everything he knew about the mountain, and slowly she stopped being a liability and became a partner. She could split wood now without supervision, could track deer through the forest, could shoot well enough that Gideon trusted her to hunt alone. The cabin transformed too. Evelyn fixed the gaps in the walls, sewed curtains from old cloth, even convinced Gideon to help her build a proper shelf for her books. It stopped feeling like a survival shelter and started feeling like a home. News from Red Hollow trickled up occasionally through travelers. Blackwell was in prison awaiting trial. The bank was being reorganized under new management. Families were getting their money back. The town was healing, slowly. Evelyn didn't miss it. Everything she needed was here, but peace never lasts forever. 2 months after Blackwell's arrest, Gideon came back from checking traps with tension in his shoulders. "Someone's been watching the cabin," he said. Evelyn's blood went cold. "Blackwell's men?" "Don't think so. Different tracks, lighter. Just one person, moving careful." "Who?" "Don't know yet, but they've been out there for at least 2 days. They prepared like they had before. Weapons loaded, supplies ready, eyes on the tree line. But this time felt different, less aggressive, more like someone waiting for something." On the 3rd day, the watcher finally showed himself. He walked into the clearing at dawn with his hands raised, no weapon visible. Young, maybe 25, with dark hair and eyes that looked too old for his face. He was thin, ragged, like he'd been traveling hard. Gideon had his rifle trained on him before the man took 3 steps. "That's far enough," Gideon said. The stranger stopped. "Gideon Hail? Who's asking?" "My name is Caleb Voss." Evelyn felt Gideon go rigid beside her. Voss. The family from 10 years ago. The man Gideon had killed. "Jacob was my father," Caleb said quietly. "You killed him." "I know. I came here to kill you for it." Gideon's finger moved to the trigger. "Then you better be faster than I am." "I'm not here to fight." Caleb's hands were still raised. "I came here to understand why." "Why what?" "Why you killed him. What really happened that day?" Gideon's jaw worked. "Your father and his brothers tried to burn me out of my home. Tried to kill me when I wouldn't sell them my land. I defended myself. That's what happened." "That's not what I was told." "Then you were lied to." Caleb's eyes flicked to Evelyn, then back to Gideon. "I spent 10 years hating you, swearing I'd avenge my father, but the more I learned about him, about what he was really like," his voice cracked slightly, "he wasn't a good man, and I think part of me always knew that." "So why are you here?" "Because I'm tired of carrying hate. Because revenge won't bring him back. Because," he lowered his hand slowly, "because I want to stop this cycle before it destroys what's left of my family." Gideon didn't lower the rifle. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing, just, I wanted to see the man who killed my father. Wanted to know if you were the monster they said you were." Caleb looked between them. "You're not. You're just someone trying to survive, same as me." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Evelyn stepped forward past Gideon's protective stance. "Your father hurt people," she said quietly. "He tried to take everything from Gideon, but that doesn't mean you have to carry his sins. You can choose differently." Caleb's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I don't know how. You start by walking away, by choosing to live your own life instead of dying for his mistakes. And if I can't, then you'll end up just like him, angry and violent and gone too soon." Evelyn held his gaze. "Is that what you want?" Caleb stood there, shaking slightly, wrestling with something too big for words. Finally, he shook his head. "No," he whispered. "No, it's not." "Then go," Gideon said, finally lowering the rifle. "Live. Make better choices than your father did. That's the only revenge worth having." Caleb nodded slowly. He turned to leave, then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said without looking back. "For what he did to you. For the years you lost." "I'm sorry too," Gideon replied. And then Caleb Voss walked back into the forest, and they never saw him again. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That could have gone very differently. Yeah, you could have killed him. I could have. Why didn't you? Gideon set the rifle down, his face tired. Because you were right. The cycle has to end somewhere. Might as well be here. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, careful of his healing shoulder. He held her back, solid and warm. We're going to be okay, she said. Yeah, Gideon agreed. We are. And standing there in the clearing with the sun rising over the mountains and the future stretching out before them, Evelyn believed it. Winter came early that year, settling over Blackstone Ridge like a predator claiming territory. The first snow fell in October, heavy and relentless, transforming the mountain into something beautiful and deadly. Evelyn woke one morning to find the world outside the cabin buried under 2 feet of white, the trees sagging under the weight, the creek frozen solid enough to walk across. We're snowed in, Gideon said, standing at the window with his coffee. Won't be able to get down the mountain until spring thaw. Evelyn joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. How long is that? 4 months, maybe 5. Just us? Just us. She thought about that. 4 months trapped in a small cabin with nothing but each other and the brutal wilderness. 6 months ago, the idea would have terrified her. Now it felt like something else entirely. Good, she said. Gideon smiled into his coffee. You say that now. Wait until February when we're both going stir-crazy and you're sick of looking at my face. I could never get sick of your face. You will. I'm annoying when I'm bored. More annoying than usual? Significantly. Evelyn laughed, and the sound felt warm in the cold cabin. They'd fallen into this easy rhythm over the past months, this back and forth that felt like dancing without music. She'd learned his moods, his silences, the way he'd get quiet when he was thinking about the past. He'd learned hers too. Knew when she needed space, when she needed to talk, when she just needed him to hold her. It wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes. Evelyn could be stubborn as stone when she thought she was right, and Gideon had a habit of shutting down instead of talking through problems. But they always worked through it, always came back to each other. That was marriage, Evelyn realized. Not the fantasy she'd imagined as a girl, all romance and poetry. The real thing was messier, harder, built from 1,000 small choices to keep choosing each other even when it wasn't easy. The weeks passed slowly. They settled into winter routines, tending the fire, rationing supplies, keeping the cabin warm. Gideon taught Evelyn how to ice fish through holes in the frozen creek. She taught him how to read, slowly working through the few books she'd brought from Red Hollow. Most nights they'd sit by the fire, her reading aloud while he worked on some project, sharpening knives, repairing tools, carving small figures from scrap wood. One night in late November, she closed the book and found him watching her instead of working. What? She asked. Nothing, just thinking. About what? He set down the piece of wood he'd been carving. About how different this is from what I expected my life to be. Different good or different bad? Different good. Strange good. I spent 10 years thinking I'd die alone up here, that I'd just fade away and eventually someone would find my bones in the spring. He looked at her. Never thought I'd have this. This? You. A home. A reason to wake up that isn't just survival. Evelyn's throat tightened. I never thought I'd have it either. After my father died, after Blackwell started circling, I thought my life was over, that I'd either marry a monster or starve. I never imagined, she gestured around the cabin. Freedom. Is that what this is? Isn't it? No one telling us what to do, who to be. No one controlling our lives, just us making our own choices. Even if those choices mean freezing our asses off in the mountains? Especially then. Gideon reached for her hand, his rough fingers lacing through hers. I'm glad you chose this. Chose me. I'm glad you chose me too. They sat like that for a while, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, wind howled against the cabin walls, but inside it was warm and quiet and safe. December brought worse storms. Blizzards that lasted days, winds that sounded like wolves screaming, temperatures so cold the water bucket froze solid overnight. They burned through firewood faster than Gideon liked, which meant he had to venture out between storms to chop more, coming back half frozen and crusted with ice. Evelyn worried every time he left. The mountain was merciless in winter. One wrong step,
One moment of carelessness, and you were dead. I'll be fine, Gideon always said.
You better be. I didn't survive all this just to become a widow before spring. Romantic as always. I'm serious. If you die out there, I'm going to be extremely angry with you. Noted. But he always came back, frozen and exhausted, but alive. On Christmas Eve, or what they thought was Christmas Eve, since they'd lost exact track of dates, Evelyn woke to find Gideon gone from bed. Panic seized her until she heard movement in the main room. She emerged to find the cabin transformed. Gideon had strung up pine branches across the ceiling, filling the space with the sharp scent of evergreen. He'd carved small wooden ornaments, stars and birds and animals, and hung them from strings. And in the corner, impossibly, stood a small pine tree decorated with strips of colored cloth. "What is this?" Evelyn whispered. Gideon looked almost embarrassed. "Thought we should mark the day somehow. Make it special." "When did you do all this?" "Been working on it for weeks. The ornaments, anyway. The tree I cut this morning before you woke up." Evelyn walked slowly through the decorated cabin, touching the carved stars, the cloth ribbons. It was simple, rough, nothing like the elegant Christmas celebrations she remembered from childhood, but it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "I didn't get you anything," she said. "Don't need anything." "Gideon, I mean it. You're here. That's enough." She turned to face him, this man who'd risked everything for her, who'd fought for her, who'd somehow found a way to bring Christmas to a frozen cabin in the middle of nowhere. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." "No, I mean, I really love you, not just because you saved me or because we're married or because this is convenient. I love you because you're you, because you see the world differently than anyone I've ever met, because you're stubborn and difficult and surprisingly thoughtful, because—" He kissed her, cutting off the words. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "I know," he said. "I love you for all those reasons, too. Plus, you're a decent shot now, which is useful." Evelyn laughed, wiping at her eyes. "Very romantic." "I try." They spent that day doing nothing productive, just sitting by the fire, eating their carefully rationed supplies, telling stories about Christmases past. Gideon told her about his childhood before everything went wrong. Evelyn told him about her mother, about traditions she'd almost forgotten. That night, lying in bed with snow falling outside and the fire burning low, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. Not just contentment, something deeper. "Gideon?" she said into the darkness. "Yeah?" "I think I might be pregnant." His entire body went still. "What?" "I'm not sure. But I've been feeling different, and I'm late, and I'm never late, and how long have you known?" "A week, maybe 2. I didn't want to say anything until I was certain." "And are you certain?" "No, but probably." Gideon sat up, lit a candle. In the flickering light, his face was unreadable. "How do you feel about it?" he asked carefully. Evelyn thought about the question, about bringing a child into this harsh world, this brutal mountain, about the risks, the danger, the 1,000 ways it could go wrong. "Terrified," she admitted. "Yeah, me too. But also," she put her hand on her stomach, "also kind of amazed that we made something, that we could. We don't have a doctor up here. If something goes wrong, then we'll handle it, like we handle everything else." "Evelyn, childbirth is dangerous even with help. Out here, alone, we're not alone. We have each other." She took his hand, placed it over hers on her stomach. "And we'll figure it out. We always do." Gideon's hand was warm and steady. "A baby," he said, like he was testing the word. "A baby. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. We'll learn together." He was quiet for a long time, his hand still pressed to her stomach. Finally, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We can do this." "You sure?" "No, but we're doing it anyway." Winter deepened, and with it came the reality of what they were facing. Gideon became obsessively careful, watching Evelyn like she might break. He wouldn't let her chop wood or carry heavy loads. He checked on her constantly, worried over every cough or sign of fatigue. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told him after he'd stopped her from climbing a ladder to fix a loose shutter. You could fall. I could also fall walking across the room. Should I just sit still for 9 months? Maybe. Gideon. I'm serious. What if something happens to you, to the baby? Then it happens. But we can't live in fear of every possible disaster. That's not living at all. He knew she was right, but it didn't stop him from worrying. And as January turned to February and Evelyn's belly started to show, his worry only intensified. They were running low on supplies. The winter had been harder than expected, and their carefully rationed food was nearly gone. Gideon went out hunting every day that weather allowed, but game was scarce. Animals had either migrated or holed up to survive the cold. One afternoon in late February, he came back empty-handed again, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said. Evelyn set down the shirt she'd been mending. "What's wrong? We're not going to make it to spring, not with current supplies." "How bad is it?" 3 weeks of food, maybe 4 if we stretch it, but spring thaw is still 6 weeks out, minimum. So what do we do? Gideon pulled out a map he'd drawn of the territory. There's a trapper's cabin about 20 miles north. Old friend of mine used to work that territory. If he's still there, he might have supplies we can trade for. And if he's not, then the cabin might still have emergency stores. Trappers usually keep backup supplies cached in case of situations like this. 20 miles in winter. That's a week's journey, minimum. 5 days if I push hard. Evelyn's hand went to her stomach. You're leaving me alone. I don't want to, but if we do nothing, we starve. All 3 of us. She knew he was right, hated it, but knew it. How long will you be gone? 10 days total, 5 days there, 5 days back. What if you don't make it back? I'll make it back. But what if you don't? What if you get caught in a storm or fall through ice, or then you wait until spring thaw and you walk down to Red Hollow? You find Judge Webb and you tell him what happened. You don't try to survive up here alone with a baby. I'm not leaving you on this mountain. You will if you have to, for the baby. His hand covered hers on her stomach. Promise me. Evelyn wanted to argue, to refuse, to tell him they'd find another way. But she couldn't, because he was right, and they both knew it. I promise, she whispered. He left at dawn the next morning, loaded down with his pack and rifle, moving fast to make time before the next storm hit. Evelyn watched from the cabin door until he disappeared into the trees. Then she was alone. The first day was the worst. Every sound made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like something trying to get in. She kept the rifle loaded and close, checking the windows obsessively. By the 3rd day, she'd settled into a routine. Keep the fire going, ration food carefully, stay busy to avoid thinking about all the ways Gideon might not come back. On the 5th day, a storm rolled in, the worst yet. Wind strong enough to shake the cabin walls, snow so thick she couldn't see 5 feet beyond the windows. It lasted 2 days straight. Evelyn sat by the fire, hand on her growing belly, and prayed to anyone who might be listening that Gideon had found shelter, that he was safe, that he'd come back to her. The storm finally broke on the 7th day. Evelyn woke to silence, that particular quiet that comes after a blizzard, when the world is muffled under fresh snow. She went to the window and saw a landscape transformed. Snow piled higher than her waist, trees bent under the weight. The trail Gideon had taken was completely buried. If he was out there, trying to get back, she pushed the thought away. He'd survived 10 winters alone. He knew how to handle storms. He'd be fine. Day 8, day 9. Still alone. On the morning of the 10th day, Evelyn woke to the sound of scratching at the door. She grabbed the rifle, heart pounding. The scratching came again, weak, desperate. "Evelyn," a voice called, barely audible. "Open the door." She yanked it open to find Gideon collapsed on the threshold, more ice than man. He fell forward, and she caught him as best she could, dragging him inside. "I'm okay," he mumbled through chattering teeth. "I'm okay. You're frozen solid." "Got caught in the storm. Had to hole up for 3 days." She got him to the fire, peeled off his frozen clothes, wrapped him in every blanket they had. His lips were blue, his fingers white with frostbite. "Did you get supplies?" she asked while she worked. "In the pack. My friend wasn't there, but the cash was. Enough to get us through to spring." "Was it worth almost dying?" "We're not going to starve, so yeah." Evelyn wanted to yell at him, to tell him he was an idiot for risking his life. But instead, she just held him close while he shivered, letting her warmth seep into his frozen body. "Don't do that again," she whispered. "Do what?" "Make me think I lost you." His arms came around her, still shaking but strong. "I told you, I always come back." "You better, because this baby is going to need a father. And you, what do you need?" "You," she said simply. "Just you." March brought the first signs of thaw. Ice began to crack on the creek, snow started melting in patches, and Evelyn's belly grew round and full. Gideon built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and gentle. He reinforced the cabin walls, prepared supplies, read everything Evelyn could tell him about childbirth from the one medical book she had. "We should go down to Red Hollow," he said one evening. "Find a doctor. Do this properly." "We're not leaving." "Evelyn, what? This baby was made on this mountain. It's going to be born on this mountain. That's not practical." "I don't care about practical. This is our home. Our family starts here." Gideon looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. "All right," he said finally. "We do it here. But if anything goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then you'll handle it. I trust you." Those 3 words seemed to hit him harder than anything else she could have said, because in the end, that's what they'd built together. Not just love, trust. The baby came in early April, on a morning when the world was caught between winter and spring. Evelyn's water broke just after dawn, and the contractions started fast and hard. Gideon had prepared as best he could, but nothing prepares you for the reality. The hours of labor, the screaming, the blood, the moments when he was certain they were both going to die. But Evelyn was strong, stronger than he'd ever imagined. She pushed through pain that would have broken most people, and just before sunset their daughter entered the world screaming. Gideon caught her with shaking hands, wrapped her in clean cloth, placed her on Evelyn's chest. The baby was tiny and red, and absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," Evelyn breathed, tears streaming down her face. Gideon couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at this impossible thing they'd created. This tiny life that was half him, half her, entirely new. "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked. Gideon thought about it, about everything they'd survived to get here, about the mountain that had given them refuge, about the future spreading out before them. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "Hope Hail. I like it." That night, with Evelyn asleep and Hope cradled in his arms, Gideon sat by the fire and tried to process what had changed. He'd been alone for so long, had convinced himself that loneliness was his punishment, his fate, that he'd die on this mountain with nothing but his guilt for company. But now he had a family, a wife who was stronger than any person he'd ever met, a daughter who would grow up free and wild and unafraid. He'd spent 10 years believing he was a monster, but monsters don't build cradles. Monsters don't weep with joy holding their newborn child. Monsters don't change. And he had changed. Evelyn had changed him, not by making him different, but by seeing who he really was underneath all the guilt and shame and self-hatred. Spring came fully to Blackstone Ridge, melting the last of the winter snow. The creek ran high and fast. Wildflowers bloomed in the meadows. And in the cabin that had once held only loneliness, there was now laughter. Hope grew quickly, the way mountain children did, strong and curious and completely fearless. By summer, she was crawling, getting into everything, keeping both her parents exhausted and amazed. One afternoon in June, Gideon and Evelyn sat on the porch, watching Hope explore the grass nearby, her chubby hands grabbing at flowers. "Think we should go down to Red Hollow?" Gideon asked. "Let people know we're alive, that we have a daughter?" "Eventually, but not yet." "Why not?" Evelyn leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Because right now, this is perfect. Just us. Just our family. The rest of the world can wait a little longer." Gideon kissed the top of her head. "Okay, it can wait." They sat there as the sun climbed higher, watching their daughter discover the world, feeling the warmth of the day seep into their bones. Around them, the mountain stood eternal and wild, no longer a prison, but a home. A year later, they did finally make the journey down to Red Hollow. The town had changed. Blackwell was gone, tried, convicted, sent to federal prison for life. The bank had been reorganized. New families had moved in. Judge Webb had been appointed to a higher position, but still kept an office in town. People stared when Gideon and Evelyn rode in with Hope strapped to Evelyn's back. The mountain man and the woman he'd rescued, both alive and thriving, and obviously in love. The whispers followed them through the streets, but they were different now. Not fearful, curious, even respectful. Judge Webb met them at his office, his face breaking into a rare smile when he saw Hope. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You two actually made it." "We did," Evelyn said. "And you brought a guest." "Our daughter, Hope." Webb studied the baby, who stared back at him with fearless green eyes. "She looks like trouble." "She is," Gideon said, and there was pride in his voice. They spent 3 days in Red Hollow, settling affairs and reconnecting with the few people Evelyn had cared about. Then they rode back up the mountain, leaving the town behind again. Because Red Hollow wasn't home anymore. Home was the cabin. Home was the mountain. Home was wherever the three of them were together. Years passed. Hope grew into a wild, fierce child who could shoot a rifle by age 6 and track deer by age 8. She had her mother's courage and her father's stubborn independence. She was everything good about both of them, with none of their scars. Gideon taught her to survive, to respect the mountain, to face challenges without fear. Evelyn taught her to read, to think critically, to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. Together, they built a life that had nothing to do with the violence and pain that had brought them together. A life measured in small moments, morning coffee, evening stories, Hope's laughter echoing through the trees. On Hope's 10th birthday, they made the trip down to Red Hollow again. The town threw a celebration, not just for the girl, but for everything her parents represented. The courage to fight back against corruption, the strength to choose love over hate, the determination to build something good from the ashes of tragedy. That night, back in the cabin, Gideon and Evelyn sat on the porch while Hope slept inside. The stars were bright overhead, the air warm with summer. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked. "Marrying me that day?" Evelyn thought about the question, about everything they'd survived, the fear, the violence, the brutal winters, the moments when death felt closer than morning, about the life they'd built despite it all. "Not once," she said. "Even when it was hard? Especially when it was hard, because that's when it mattered most." She took his hand. "You gave me my life back, Gideon. My choices. My freedom. Everything I am now, everything Hope is, exists because you walked into that church and refused to let me be sold. You gave me everything too. A reason to live that wasn't just survival, a family, a future." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars wheel overhead. "What do you think happens next?" Evelyn asked. "What do you mean?" "For us. For Hope. What's the next chapter?" Gideon smiled. "Whatever we choose, that's the point, isn't it? We get to choose." And that was the truth of it. After everything they'd survived, after all the violence and fear and desperate choices, they'd arrived at something simple and profound. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from running away or hiding from the world. The kind that comes from facing your demons, fighting for what matters, and building something worth protecting. The mountain had taught them that. The brutal winters, the endless silence, the unforgiving wilderness. It had stripped away everything false and left only what was real. Love, trust, family, choice. These were the things worth fighting for, worth surviving for, worth building a life around. Gideon Hail had spent 10 years in exile, believing he was a monster. But in the end, he'd learned the most important truth of all. You're not defined by your worst moment. You're defined by what you choose to do after. And he'd chosen love, chosen family, chosen to be something better than his past. Evelyn Mercer had spent her life being told she was powerless. But she'd learned that power comes not from what others give you, but from what you refuse to let them take away. Together, they'd built a kingdom on a mountain, not of gold or land or material wealth, a kingdom of moments, of choices, of love freely given and fiercely protected. As the night deepened and the stars burned bright overhead, they sat together on their porch. This family that shouldn't have existed, this love that had been forged in fire and violence and desperation. And they were happy. Not perfect, not without scars or struggles or difficult days ahead, but happy. Because in the end, That's all anyone can ask for. To survive the darkness, to find someone worth surviving for, and to build something beautiful from the wreckage. Inside, hope stirred in her sleep, safe and loved and free. Outside, the mountains stood eternal, and on the porch between them, Gideon and Evelyn held hands and watched the future unfold, uncertain, challenging, and absolutely worth fighting for.